Expo academic program. Some of you have heard me do this thing a number of times already. Some of you are here for the first time. So I'll just repeat myself, I apologize. My name is Mikhail Kulikov. I'm the producer of the academic program at AX. Over the course of the 6 years now that Anime Expo has been running an academic program, one thing I've always tried to do is come up with a general theme for each year's panels. The themes are not necessarily explicit or right there, but I do try to arrange the sessions or the presentations in some sort of order so that there is some kind of underlying connecting thread to them. And I'd like to think that the underlying connecting thread this year has been showing how Japan and Japanese society, Japanese culture has changed over the years, over the last few years, over the last several decades, and really over the centuries. And more importantly, how Japanese popular culture both reflects those changes and itself has changed quite a lot within, again, a few years, within a few decades, and over longer time frames. And this session really addresses that specifically, the changes that are inherent to Japan as a country, to really any culture, and to any countries and cultures' popular culture. One more theme that I've tried to emphasize is that what we do as quote-unquote anime scholars is based on and is inherently tied into using our work but connecting it to other theories that other scholars apply to other fields, to film, to literature. And the whole idea of being a scholar is that we're not just doing this on our own. We are a part of a broader, larger community. We have to be aware of that. We have to consider that. And in this particular session, I'm really honored actually to have the speakers show how their own work connects to broader theories and major broader themes. It is my pleasure to introduce Amanda Cannell, who some of you, if you've attended this before, may remember from a couple of the previous years. Amanda, it's all yours.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to my talk about adaptation and evolution in anime. Before getting into either adaptation or evolution, I'd like to talk a bit about a pair of series I think we've all heard of. Monkey Punch's Lupin III and Yoko Ikeda's Rose of Versailles. Both series began around the same time. Lupin III initially ran from 1967 to 69, and Rose of Versailles followed from 72 to 73. Despite both series' elite status in the canon of modern manga, their original incarnations ran for relatively short periods, about 2 and 3 years. Part of what has distinguished them over the years is the proliferation of sequels, art books, Takarazuka productions, live-action films, and other incarnations that we might collectively call adaptations. So, Lupin III is about a master's thief named Arsène Lupin III and his various generally comical adventures. Lupin has a quartet of regular co-stars: Interpol detective Koichi Zenigata, our erstwhile samurai thief Goemon Ishikawa XIII, Lupin in the middle, of course, a gunslinger, or officially marksman, called Daisuke Jigen, and another thief, Fujiko Mine. Sometimes Lupin's allies, sometimes his rivals, I guess, and then in Zenigata's case, always his antagonist. These 4 characters appear in pretty much every Lupin adaptation. There are certain things consumers come to expect from Lupin anime, or manga, or any other product. Goemon will try to be an honorable samurai, even though he earns his living through crime. Fujiko will probably lose her clothing at some point. You just kind of expect certain things. Now, how Fujiko is sexualized takes different forms from series to series. In probably the least sexed up adaptation, Hayao Miyazaki's 1979 film Castle of Cagliostro, Fujiko's military kamo outfit kind of has a little V-neck, and she's given a nice position on the motorcycle, which is a very common theme for her, motorcycles, which contrasts a bit with the young, virginal, romantic interest of the same film. That's a bit different from the comics, which get a little more sexual. So here's a picture from chapter 28 of the second Lupin comic in the upper left. an image from a Detective Conan Lupin III joint film with Fujiko in the background, who's rather contrasting with the young child in the front, and a poster from a live-action Lupin III film. The series is rather famous for stripping Fujiko about once per episode. Given that the comic ran in the Seinen magazine Weekly Manga Action in the 60s, it's really not too surprising. But what I'd like to talk about today is the 2012 anime series Lupin III, a woman called Fujiko Mine. This series could have gone a lot of different ways. It's the first Lupin series directed by a woman, Sayo Yamamoto. The script is also by Mari Okada. Between them, they've done Michiko to Hachin, scores of opening and ending animation sequences, Mobile Suit Gundam, Iron-Blooded Orphans, Black Butler, Vampire Knight, and Basilisk. So a pair of skilled women known for depicting strong women that appeal to male and female viewers were tackling a series whose sexist depictions of its main female character were an old joke like 20, 30 years ago. How then did they tackle Lupin? Well, they started off before the series even aired by saying that they were going back to the sensuality of the comic. And if you look at these images from the opening credits, you can see that they have, if anything, taken the standard trope of stripping Fujiko and applied it faster than any of the previous series. They didn't even get into the actual series, they just went for it in the opening credits. And the whole set of credits is like this. Aside from Fujiko, the main characters are all there, Lupin, Jigen, Goemon, and Zenigata. However, they added a new character, who might sound familiar to those of you who've seen Rose of Versailles. As you may recall, Rose of Versailles is ostensibly about Frances Marie Antoinette, but it in fact follows a young woman named Oscar, who was raised as a man. In disguise, she protects Marie Antoinette as a member of the Queen's personal guard until she's persuaded to join the French Revolution, despite being a noble herself. Along the way, she falls in love with her servant Andre, and basically is given a lot of angst because she identifies as a man and a noble, and yet falls in love with another guy, finds out that she's really a girl inside, and joins with the rabble-rousers. Yamamoto and Okada draw directly from Rose of Versailles, creating another character named Oscar, on the left, featured with Zenigata. He's Inspector Zenigata's lieutenant, and the audience first meets him in disguise as a young pupil at a girls' school. So Oscar's androgynous nature is emphasized throughout the series in, for example, another cross-dressing sequence, but Yamamoto and Okada did not merely pay homage to Rose of Versailles with a cross-dressing character named Oscar. Where Rose of Versailles' Oscar is depicted as an elite member of society falling in love with her servant, this new Oscar is more or less a servant who we eventually find out has fallen in love with his superior, Zenigata. Where Versailles' Oscar betrayed the socio-political ruling class of which she is part, Lupin's Oscar is repeatedly depicted breaking laws, even though he's supposed to be a cop. Now, I could go on and analyze what all this means for Lupin III, this series. It's really very fascinating, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch it. But what I'm actually interested in here today is, as I said at the beginning, adaptation and evolution in anime. What is this anime? And once we know what it is, what does that tell us about how anime are made? A woman called Fujiko Mine was introduced as a continuation in the Lupin III body of works, which, as I mentioned before, are best considered adaptations of the first manga series. But, as I have just described it, you can also call this anime an adaptation of Rose of Versailles. And adaptation is the key idea here. By adaptation, I mean the creation and remaking of a story over time, across different media platforms and for new purposes. Japanese popular culture presents particularly fertile ground for the study of adaptation because the theory known as the media mix has dominated Japanese media industry's production methods for decades. Media scholar Mark Steinberg even argues that Japanese media have been produced this way for pretty much the entire post-World War II period. It's very similar to Henry Jenkins' concept of convergence, and the term media mix refers to the intentional creation of stories across multiple media at the same time, like when Marvel Studios teamed up with Marvel Entertainment and Marvel Press to release The Avengers as not just a film, but also a comic book and a children's storybook. To be clear, a media mix product is a type of adaptation, but not all adaptations are media mix products. Adaptation, while a fairly simple term by academic standards, still bears unpacking. Linda Hutchin, in A Theory of Adaptation, notes that the term applies to both the process of adapting a work and the final product. As such, she shifts one's focus away from the previous model of adaptation, where a single source work was adapted into a later, secondary, and often presumed inferior adaptation. She offers a new three-part definition intended to grant more respect to adaptations. Namely, she argues that an adaptation is an acknowledged transposition of a recognizable other work or works, a creative and an interpretive act of appropriation or salvaging, and an extended intertextual engagement with the adapted work. So this clearly describes a woman called Fujiko Mina in relation to both Lupin III and Rose of Versailles, yet we don't normally talk about adaptations as having 2 source works, or 3 or 4 or any more. I would like to turn to another type of adaptation, translation, to examine how an anime can be simultaneously considered an adaptation of 2 very different members of the anime canon. In Walter Benjamin's seminal essay on translation, The Task of the Translator, he argues that translators' true aim is not the simple transposition of a text from one language to another, but to stretch the boundaries of the language into which they are translating the text. In addition to glorifying translation as a practice, Benjamin exalts translations themselves. What concerns me here is the specific language Benjamin used to glorify translations. He repeatedly refers to translations in terms of pseudo or partial life, as when he says that a translation issues from the original, not so much from its life as from its afterlife. So the translation arises from the afterlife of the original, which was never alive. At the same time, the source work's translation marks its, quote, continued life in a new form. Throughout his essay, Benjamin oscillates between a bold new definition of life and a pseudo-life or afterlife that is the special realm of art. This afterlife is given to art by human beings in a sense. When artworks gain a, quote, potentially eternal afterlife, Benjamin argues, it appears as fame among people. We thus create the afterlife of art, but we are also perhaps a threat to it. Translations that are more than transmissions of subject matter come into being when in the course of its survival a work has reached the age of its fame. The work survives us. Depredation is enacted by people over time, and if it survives long enough, it achieves not a life, but an afterlife. The desire to see works of art as alive appears over and over again in theoretical writing on how those works travel across time and space. When Otsuka collected his essays on the media mix into a larger book, he divided them into 4 major parts. The first part expounds his theory, while the second covered replicated stories, or fukusei sareru monogatari, and the third consumed stories, or shohi sareru monogatari. The final section's title is a touch more complicated. It could be translated as replaying stories, or stories that replay, saisei suru monogatari, in the mechanical sense of an MP3 player that's replaying the music you uploaded to it. But the verb saisei suru also means to come back to life. You may have noticed characters in, for example, Samurai Deeper Kill that are named Saisei. They literally mean, the character's name actually means that they've come back to life, which is kind of a hint in that series. In Otsuka's book, stories are first replicated or mass manufactured for huge audiences. Then those audiences consume them until finally the stories are reborn. Otsuka thus implies that stories have their own circle of life, emerging to carpet the ground in plant life, which we humans eat. And in consuming those stories, we scatter the seeds, which grow into new stories at a later date. Now, like Benjamin, Otsuka does not take the metaphor quite this far. He is not intentionally arguing that stories are alive, but glimmers of life appear in the words that he chooses to describe his theories. The link between life and artistic adaptation is so strong that Richard Dawkins devoted an entire chapter of his landmark study of evolution to it, in the shape of the now famous meme. He premises his argument on the idea that cultural transmission is analogous to genetic transmission, in that, though basically conservative, it can give rise to evolution. Aside from genes, though, he allows that other replicators can and do exist, and he offers the meme as a cultural replicator. I could continue listing off theorists, scientists, and artists who have suggested that art is somewhat alive, kind of alive, maybe sort of, but not totally alive. But I'd like to go a little further. Why not just say that the art we create simply is alive? Like a skilled bonsai gardener, mangaka, directors, and other artists select the basic plant that they'll work with, high school romantic comedy manga, for example, and then train it into the shape that they want using their years of experience. Yamamoto and Ohada's A Woman Called Fujiko Mina, then, would be a hybrid species, a mix of Monkey Punch's Lupin III and Ryoko Ikeda's Rose of Versailles. There are some major benefits to looking at culture in this way. For those of you who follow debates on diversity in the arts in America or Japan, you have probably found yourself on awkward territory at some point. One of the best arguments for supporting diversity behind the camera, as they say in the film industry, is because that diversity would alter what appears on camera. Yet, arguing that the simple fact that the creator was female somehow altered the work that she produced is untenably reductionist for many. It suggests that men and women are and will always be completely different, leaving open the possibility that art created by one gender could be or is better than the other, and that's why we have, say, very few female anime directors. However, if we look at adaptations as living beings in their own right, cultivated by women and men of equal skill but different experiences, the value of diversity becomes quickly apparent. Would a male director have thought of crossbreeding Lupin III with Rose of Versailles? Maybe, but it's unlikely because that's a shoujo classic. Men have heard of it, some have seen it, and several were certainly involved in its production, but it doesn't rank as highly in male anime industry workers' mental garden as boy-focused classics like Astro Boy and Doraemon. And in fact, Lupin offers an example of exactly what a male director would do if he were to cross Lupin with another series. The Lupin III detective picture that I showed with Fujiko in the hot tub, that's from a cross genre, I guess, film that joined Lupin III and Detective Conan. Also a shonen classic, directed by two men, directed by Hajime Kanagaki, written by a second man, Atsushi Maepawa. And they made two films blending Lupin III and Detective Conan. So the various adaptations of Lupin III have taken the series a long way from the original raunchy comedic manga. We get, for example, a highly sexual version by two women, and a version with actually very little sexuality, comparatively speaking, by two men. Yet they are all recognizable as being part of the same species at heart. Therefore, I suggest that we take the work of theorists like Benjamin Otsuka and Dawkins farther and simply agree that the stories we love have lives of their own and evolve over time. Thank you.